Nora Williams, a 13-year-old black girl whose skin gleamed under the fluorescent lights, walked down the hallway with her head lowered. Her Nike sneakers, a birthday gift from her mom, squeaked softly on the linoleum. She clutched her backpack as if it could shield her from the words hurled her way. "Hey, Nora, lost again? Need a map to find your block," shouted Trevor, a tall white 8th grader with blonde hair poking out from under a baseball cap. His smile was sharp, like a blade. Behind him, 2 other boys, Zach and Kyle, burst into laughter. Their voices echoed off the metal lockers, blending with the chatter of other students rushing to class. Nora kept her eyes down. She quickened her pace, but Trevor blocked her path, leaning against a locker. "What, no response?" he pressed, leaning closer. He smelled of mint gum and cheap cologne. "Maybe you don't speak English? Repeat after me. I don't belong here." A few students stopped, forming a semicircle. Some snickered. Others looked away. Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. Her fingers tightened on the straps of her backpack. "Leave me alone, Trevor," she said quietly, her voice trembling but carrying a steely edge. "Oh, she speaks." Trevor stepped back theatrically, raising his hands. "Guys, we've got a rebel here." Zach, his face dotted with freckles, chimed in. "Maybe her mom can teach her some manners. Isn't she a janitor or something?" Nora froze. Her mother, Kimberly Williams, wasn't a janitor. She was an Afghanistan war veteran, a sergeant who came home with a medal for bravery and scars she hid under long sleeves. But Nora didn't say that. She never did. The words stuck in her throat, like dry bread. "Come on, Nora, don't be so boring," Kyle, the shortest of the trio, said, shoving her shoulder. His touch was light, but felt like a blow. A voice suddenly cut through from the end of the hallway. "What's going on here?" It was Mrs. Henderson, the math teacher, with gray streaks in her hair and a notebook in hand. Her glasses sat low on her nose, but her gaze was sharp. "Nothing, Mrs. Henderson," Trevor said with a grin, stepping back. "Just chatting." "Chatting?" She stepped closer, her eyes flicking from Trevor to Nora. "Nora, are you okay?" Nora nodded, though her eyes glistened with tears she held back. She didn't want to seem weak. Not here. Not in front of them. "Get to class," Mrs. Henderson said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Trevor and his friend sauntered off, throwing Nora one last mocking glance. When the teacher turned away, Nora leaned against a locker. Her heart pounded, and Zach's words echoed in her mind. "Isn't she a janitor?" She imagined telling her mom, then pushed the thought away. Her mom had enough worries. Night shifts at the hospital, where she worked as a nurse, and memories that sometimes woke her screaming from nightmares. That evening, the Williams apartment smelled of fried chicken and spices. Kimberly, in an old Army Strong t-shirt, stood at the stove, stirring sauce. Her short, curly hair was pulled into a ponytail, and a tattoo on her wrist, a date marking her return from Afghanistan, was visible. "Nora, dinner's ready," she called. Nora sat at the small kitchen table, flipping through a social studies textbook. She didn't look up. "You're quiet today," Kimberly said, setting a plate in front of her daughter. "Something happen?" "No, I'm fine," Nora said, shrugging, her voice too flat. Kimberly sat across from her, her dark eyes studying Nora. She knew that look, the same one Nora had at 5 when she fell off her bike and tried to hide the pain. "Nora, you know you can tell me anything." "Mom, I said I'm fine," Nora snapped, opening her textbook with a jerk. Kimberly sighed but didn't push. She knew Nora would open up when she was ready, or she'd find out herself. The next day at school, the tension only grew. During lunch, Nora sat alone in a corner of the cafeteria, holding a sandwich she hadn't touched. Her gaze was fixed on the table, but she heard Trevor and his friends laughing a few tables away. "Hey, Nora, why don't you join us?" Trevor yelled, holding a fry like a microphone. "Tell us what it's like living in the ghetto." The word ghetto hit like a slap. A few students turned. Some giggled. Others shook their heads. Nora's face burned. She grabbed her things and headed for the exit, but Zach blocked her path. "Where's the rush?" He smirked, his eyes cold. "We're just joking." "It's not a joke," Nora said, lifting her head, her voice quiet but clear. "It's humiliation." For a moment, the cafeteria fell silent. Even Trevor paused, surprised by her response. But then he laughed, shattering the quiet. "Oh, listen to her. She's a lawyer now. Maybe you should call the NAACP." Nora pushed past Zach and ran out of the cafeteria. Her eyes stung with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She hid in the library, where the smell of old books and silence calmed her. There, between the shelves, she made a promise to herself. "I won't let them break me." That same day, Kimberly got a call from the school. The principal, Mr. Collins, a man with a gray beard and a tired voice, asked her to come in for a meeting. "Mrs. Williams, we've had some complaints about Nora," he said when Kimberly sat in his office the next morning. She wore a simple blue blouse, but her posture, straight back, chin up, betrayed her military bearing. "Complaints?" Kimberly raised an eyebrow. "What complaints?" "Some students say Nora's been aggressive. Yesterday, in the cafeteria, she pushed another student." Kimberly leaned forward, her gaze icy. "Aggressive? My daughter? You're kidding, right?" She paused, reining in her anger. "What are you doing about the kids who harass her every day?" "Because I know it's happening. Nora doesn't tell me, but I'm not blind." Mr. Collins shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his glasses. "We investigate all incidents, but we need evidence." "Evidence?" Kimberly clenched her fists. "You want my daughter to record every insult? Or maybe you need a bruise to believe her." The principal was silent. Kimberly stood, her voice calm but harder than steel. "I'll be at the parent meeting, and I want to see you handle this. Because if you don't protect my daughter, I will." She left the office, leaving silence in her wake. In the hallway, she paused, hearing a familiar voice. It was Nora, talking to the librarian about a book. Kimberly looked at her daughter through the glass doors. Nora was smiling, holding the Hunger Games. But Kimberly saw the shadow in her eyes. In that moment, she realized these weren't just childish pranks. This was a war, and she, a veteran, knew how to win battles. The Rockford autumn gained momentum, and the chilly air nipped at the skin as Kimberly Williams parked her old Ford Escape outside Lincoln Middle School. The parent meeting was set to start at 6 p.m., and she arrived 10 minutes early to gather her thoughts. The car smelled of coffee from a plastic cup and the leather of her old jacket, worn since her Army days. Kimberly glanced in the rearview mirror, adjusted her ponytail, and took a deep breath. She didn't like conflict, but she wasn't about to avoid it, especially when it came to Nora. The school auditorium smelled of floor wax and cheap perfume. Parents, teachers, and a few students sat on plastic chairs arranged in rows. On the stage stood Mr. Collins, the principal, with a microphone in hand, next to Mrs. Evans, the school counselor, holding a notepad. Kimberly took a seat in the third row, her posture as straight as a soldier's on a parade ground. She noticed a few familiar parents, but didn't speak to anyone. Her eyes were fixed on the stage. "Good evening," Mr. Collins began, his voice wavering with a nervous cough. We're here to discuss issues of safety and mutual respect in our school. Recently, we've received complaints about certain incidents. Kimberly pursed her lips. Certain incidents. That's what he called the bullying of her daughter? She felt anger rising in her chest, but forced herself to listen. Meanwhile, Nora sat in the library, where she stayed after school to avoid Trevor and his crew. The librarian, Mrs. Clark, an elderly woman with kind eyes, had let her stay, though the room usually closed at 5. Nora flipped through the Hunger Games, but her mind was elsewhere. She imagined what she'd say to Trevor if she weren't afraid. In her mind, the words flowed easily, sharp as bullets. But in reality, they stuck, and that frustrated her the most. In the auditorium, Mr. Collins continued, "We want all students to feel safe. If you have suggestions for improving the situation, please share." Kimberly raised her hand. Everyone turned. Her presence, silent until now, commanded attention. She stood, hands at her sides as if on a drill field. Mrs. Williams, the principal, nodded, slightly flustered. "I want to know what you're doing to stop the bullying." Her voice was calm, but each syllable cut through the air. "My daughter, Nora, hears insults every day. She's called ghetto, pushed in the cafeteria, mocked in front of everyone. You talk about incidents, but why aren't teachers stepping in? Why do I, her mother, have to find out on my own?" The room fell silent. Some parents looked away, others nodded. A woman in a blue dress, another student's mother, whispered, "It's true, my daughter gets it too." Mr. Collins adjusted his tie. "We take such complaints seriously, but we need specific evidence, names, dates." "Evidence." Kimberly raised her eyebrows. "My daughter is afraid to go to the cafeteria. Isn't that evidence? Do you want her to record every insult on a voice recorder? Or maybe you need a black eye to believe her." From the back row, a man in a checkered shirt stood, Mr. Brown, Trevor's father. His face was red, his voice loud. "Hold on. You're accusing our kids? My son's a good boy. These are just kids' jokes. They all do it." Kimberly turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "Jokes? Calling my daughter ghetto is a joke? Tell me, sir, would you laugh if it was your son?" Mr. Brown opened his mouth, but found no words. He sat down, muttering about exaggeration. Mrs. Evans, the counselor, raised her hand, trying to defuse the tension. "Mrs. Williams, we can arrange a meeting with Nora and the other students to get the details." "A meeting?" Kimberly barely contained her anger. "My daughter shouldn't be interrogated. You should know who's doing this. Everyone in this school knows." She sat down, but her words hung in the air. Parents began whispering, and teachers exchanged glances. The principal promised to look into it, and quickly moved to other topics, but Kimberly knew this was just the beginning. The next day, Nora walked to school with a heavy heart. She knew her mom had been at the meeting and feared it would only make things worse. In the hallway, she saw Trevor whispering to Zach and Kyle. As she passed, Trevor called out, "Hey, Nora, your mom put on a show last night, huh? Maybe she should go back to the army instead of meddling in our business." Nora stopped. Her hands trembled, but she turned to him. For the first time in a long while, she looked him in the eye. "My mom fought for this country," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "What about you? You just hide behind your friends and think it makes you cool." Trevor blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't expected her to respond. Zach and Kyle exchanged looks, and a few nearby students fell silent. But Trevor recovered quickly. "Oh, look at her. So brave." He stepped closer. "Maybe you should learn to keep your mouth shut." "Enough, Trevor." A voice came from behind. It was Mrs. Henderson, who had overheard the exchange. To the principal's office. Now. Trevor rolled his eyes, but went. Nora stood, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure if speaking up was the right move, but something inside her had shifted. She felt a little stronger. That evening, Kimberly sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. Nora finally told her everything. About Trevor, the insults, how she feared being seen as weak. Kimberly listened without interrupting, her fingers gripping the mug. "I'm proud of you," she said when Nora finished. "You spoke up. That's the first step. But what if it doesn't change anything?" Nora looked down. "They won't stop." Kimberly leaned toward her, her voice warm but firm. "They will stop, not because they're good, but because we won't give up. We're Williamses. We don't back down." Nora nodded, but her eyes held doubt. Kimberly knew words were only the start. She called her army friend who worked at the local paper and asked her to cover the issue of bullying in Rockford schools. She also scheduled a meeting with the school board. If the principal wouldn't act, she'd go higher. A week later, changes appeared at school. Mrs. Evans organized a workshop on mutual respect, though Trevor and his friends sat in the back, whispering and laughing. But Nora noticed some students starting to talk to her. A girl named Emily, who had previously avoided her, sat next to her in biology and offered to work on a project together. It was a small victory, but for Nora it meant the world. Kimberly, meanwhile, prepared for the next step. She knew changing the system wasn't one battle, but a war. And she was ready. She'd seen too much injustice, on the battlefield and at home, to stop now. One evening, as Nora did homework, Kimberly received a letter from the school board. They agreed to investigate the bullying complaints. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a start. Kimberly looked at her daughter, sitting at the table with a pencil in hand, and felt hope. Maybe Nora would learn not just to survive, but to win. But deep down, Kimberly knew there were more battles ahead, and she was ready for everyone. By November 2024, Rockford was cloaked in a thin layer of frost, and the morning fog settled in thick strands over the West End streets. Lincoln Middle School buzzed with its usual rhythm. The screech of bus brakes, the hum of students in the hallways, the smell of coffee from the teacher's lounge. But for Nora Williams, every day at school was like navigating a minefield. After she stood up to Trevor and her mom, Kimberly, caused a stir at the parent meeting, the tension in the hallways grew thicker than the autumn fog. Nora sat in social studies class, gripping her pencil so tightly her knuckles whitened. The teacher, Mr. Reed, an older man with a deep voice and a passion for historical debates, was discussing the civil rights movement. A portrait of Rosa Parks glowed on the board, and the classroom was unusually quiet. Even Trevor, sitting in the back, wasn't whispering with Zach. Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat wasn't just a gesture, Mr. Reed said, his eyes alight. It was a challenge to a system that told people they were less valuable because of their skin color. Can anyone name a modern example of such injustice? Nora's heart raced. She knew the answer, but the words stuck in her throat. Everyone knew what was happening in the school, but no one dared say it aloud. She glanced at Emily, the girl who had recently offered to work on a project together. Emily gave her an encouraging nod. Nora slowly raised her hand. The room fell silent, and even Mr. Reed raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Nora," he said, smiling. "It's when you're insulted because of who you are," she began, her voice trembling but growing stronger with each word. "Like when you're called ghetto or told you don't belong here. And no one stops it because they think it's just a joke." All eyes turned to the back row where Trevor sat. His face reddened, But he didn't look away, throwing Nora a defiant stare. Zach let out a nervous giggle, but Kyle lowered his head, as if trying to disappear. Mr. Reed took off his glasses and set them on the desk. "That's a serious claim, Nora," he said calmly. "And I'm glad you spoke up. This is what we need to talk about. Anyone else want to add?" Emily raised her hand. "I've seen it happen," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Not just with Nora. Other kids get picked on too, and we all just stay quiet." Trevor stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "That's a lie," he shouted. "She's just looking for attention. Her mom already made a circus at the meeting, and now she's keeping it up." "Sit down, Trevor." Mr. Reed's voice turned sharp. "And if you have something to say it with respect." Trevor sat, muttering under his breath. Nora's cheeks burned, but she didn't lower her eyes. For the first time, she felt she wasn't alone. That same day, Kimberly sat in the office of the Rockford Register-Star, across from her friend Linda, a journalist with 20 years of experience. The office smelled of ink and old wood, and through the window, bare tree branches were visible. Linda, her gray hair pulled into a bun, flipped through her notes. "Your story could be big, Kim," she said, tapping her pen on the desk. "Bullying in schools isn't news, but a war veteran fighting for her daughter? That hits home. People will read it." "I don't need fame," Kimberly said, crossing her arms. "I want the school to act. I want Nora to go to class without fear." Linda nodded. "I get it, but publicity is pressure. We'll write the article, call it. Say, Veteran versus Injustice. A fight for school safety. I'll talk to some parents and teachers, but I need facts. Got names?" Kimberly sighed. "Trevor Brown, Zach Miller, Kyle Reed. They're the ringleaders, but it's not just them. Teachers see what's happening and do nothing. The principal hides behind paperwork." Linda jotted down the names. "All right, I'll start with this. But be ready. When the article drops, it'll stir up a storm." Kimberly smiled, but her eyes were steely. "Eve survived various storms." A few days later, the article appeared on the front page of the Rockford Register-Star. The headline was exactly as Linda promised: "Veteran versus Injustice." It detailed Nora's experience, the insults, the school's inaction. There was even a photo of Kimberly in her Army uniform from 10 years ago, next to a recent one in her blue blouse, standing tall. The article quoted Nora and several parents who confirmed bullying was a systemic issue at the school. The reaction was immediate. The school's parent chat exploded with debates. Some accused Kimberly of stirring drama. Others thanked her for her courage. Local radio invited her for an interview, but she declined. It wasn't time for a show. Her goal was closer, to force the school board to act. At school, Trevor grew more aggressive. During a break, he approached Nora in the hallway, holding a crumpled copy of the newspaper. "You think this'll save you?" He shoved the paper into her hands. "Your mom can write whatever she wants, but you're still nobody here." Nora stepped back, but her voice was calm. "I'm not nobody, Trevor, and you know it." He laughed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Before he could say more, Mrs. Henderson appeared in the hallway. "Trevor, to the principal's office." "Again," she said, her tone brooking no argument. As Trevor walked off, Mrs. Henderson put a hand on Nora's shoulder. "You're doing great, standing your ground. If anything happens, come to me. I promise I won't look away." Nora nodded, feeling warmth in her chest. It was the first time a teacher had so openly supported her. The following week, the school board held an open hearing. The City Hall auditorium was packed. Parents, reporters, even a few local activists. Kimberly stood at the microphone, her voice steady, each word landing like a stone in water. "My daughter shouldn't be afraid to go to school," she said. "And no child should. You say you need evidence. But the evidence is my daughter's tears. The evidence is the silence of teachers. If you can't protect our kids, what are you here for?" Her words sparked applause, but not everyone agreed. Mr. Brown, Trevor's father, gave an indignant speech, accusing Kimberly of slandering his son. But this time, few supported him. Most parents demanded change. Cameras in hallways, training for teachers, stricter punishments for bullies. Nora, sitting in the back row, listened to her mom and felt mixed emotions. She was proud but scared. What if this changed nothing? What if Trevor and his friends just found new ways to target her? A month later, the school implemented new rules. Zero tolerance for bullying, mandatory workshops for students and teachers, an anonymous hotline for complaints. Trevor, Zach, and Kyle were suspended for a week, and their parents had to attend counseling sessions. But Nora knew it wasn't over. Trevor still shot her angry glares, and the whispers in the hallways didn't stop. One day after school, Nora was in the library when Emily approached her. "I want to apologize," Emily said, nervously twisting a bracelet on her wrist. "I saw what they did to you, but I stayed quiet. That was wrong." Nora looked at her, surprised. "Thanks," she said softly. "That means a lot." Emily smiled. "Want to sit together in the cafeteria tomorrow?" Nora nodded, feeling a small knot in her chest loosen. That night, Kimberly and Nora sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. A bowl of popcorn sat on the table, and an old comedy played on the TV. Nora leaned against her mom, and for the first time in a long while, she felt peace. "Mom, do you think it'll ever stop?" she asked quietly. Kimberly stroked her head. "I don't know, baby. But I know we won't give up, and you're getting stronger every day." Nora smiled, staring at the screen. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, she felt she could handle it. Maybe not everything would change at once, but every small step, every word, every ally was a beginning. And that was enough. The winter of 2024 in Rockford was cold but not harsh. Snow fell in soft flakes, blanketing the West End sidewalks in a thin white layer that crunched underfoot. At Lincoln Middle School, holiday decorations, paper snowflakes and garlands, swayed in the hallways, but the atmosphere remained tense. The new anti-bullying rules were in place, but Nora Williams knew. Real change came slowly, like a thaw after a long winter. Nora sat in the cafeteria, holding a tray of mac and cheese. For the first time that year, she was joined by Emily and another girl, Sophia, who had recently moved to Rockford. They laughed over a joke about the school play, and Nora felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the hot food. She still noticed Trevor at a far table with Zach and Kyle, but his glares were less frequent, his taunts quieter. The suspension and parental counseling seemed to have worked, if only partially. Kimberly, meanwhile, didn't slow down. After the school board hearing, she became a regular at meetings, demanding reports on the new rules enforcement. Her friend Linda, at the Rockford Register-Star, published another article, this time about how the Rockford community was uniting to fight bullying. It ended with a quote from Kimberly. "I fought for my country, but the most important battle is protecting my daughter and every child who deserves safety." The words spread through the city. Local churches and community centers began holding tolerance workshops, and a few parents, inspired by Kimberly, formed a support group for bullied students. Nora reluctantly agreed to attend one meeting, expecting it to be boring, but was surprised to see a dozen other kids, white, black, Latino, sharing similar stories. For the first time, she felt her pain wasn't unique, but it didn't define her either. One December evening, the school held a winter concert. The auditorium was decorated with pine branches that smelled of sap, and an old piano hummed low notes on the stage during rehearsals. Nora hadn't planned to participate, but Mr. Reed, her social studies teacher, convinced her to read a short essay about what justice meant to her. "Your voice matters, Nora," he said, and though she hesitated, she agreed. When her turn came, Nora stepped onto the stage, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. Her heart pounded, but she looked out at the audience, where Kimberly, Emily, and even Mrs. Henderson sat, and felt a surge of courage. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the heater. "Justice isn't just laws or rules," Nora began, her voice shaky at first, but growing stronger. "It's when you can be yourself, and no one makes you feel less. I know what it's like to be insulted and think it's your fault, but I've learned silence isn't the answer. Justice starts when we speak." She paused, her eyes meeting Trevor's in the back row. He didn't look away, but his usual defiance was gone. Nora finished her essay, and the room erupted in applause. Kimberly, in the front row, wiped tears from her eyes, but her smile was wider than ever. After the concert, Trevor approached Nora in the hallway. She braced herself for another insult, but he looked different, shoulders slumped, hands in his pockets. "Look," he started, avoiding her gaze. I shouldn't have said all that stuff. My dad made me read that article about your mom. She's pretty cool, and I guess I was a jerk." Nora blinked, stunned. She'd expected anything but this. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly. Trevor shrugged. "I don't know. Everyone was doing it, and I thought it was funny. But it's not funny, is it?" "No," Nora said, her voice firm but not angry. "It's not." He nodded and walked away without another word. Nora stood, a mix of emotions, relief, disbelief, hope swirling in her chest. She wasn't sure if Trevor was sincere, but his words were a first step. And that was enough. That night, Kimberly and Nora sat in the kitchen, sipping hot cocoa. Outside, snow fell, and the apartment smelled of cinnamon from a candle Nora had lit. Kimberly watched her daughter, who was talking about the concert, and felt pride mixed with quiet sorrow. She knew Nora would still face challenges. Not every Trevor would change. Not every school would be safe. But she also knew her daughter had learned to stand up for herself. "You were incredible today," Kimberly said, squeezing Nora's hand. "I always knew you were strong, but now you've shown the world." Nora smiled, but her eyes were thoughtful. "Mom, do you think school will ever be normal?" Kimberly paused, choosing her words. "Normal? Maybe not, but it can be better. And you're part of that change. Not just for yourself, but for others." Nora nodded, gazing at the snow outside. She imagined one day telling her story, not as a victim, but as someone who found her voice. Maybe she'd write a book like The Hunger Games or speak to other kids. Maybe she'd just keep being herself, and that would be enough. By spring 2025, Lincoln Middle School received a grant for an anti-bullying program, partly due to the publicity Kimberly had generated. Nora became a leader in a student group helping new kids adjust. Trevor no longer bothered her, though they never became friends. Zach and Kyle kept their distance, and Emily and Sophia became her closest friends. Kimberly continued working as a nurse, but also spoke at community events, sharing the importance of protecting children. Her scars, visible and hidden, became part of her strength, not her weakness. Nora walked through the school hallway, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She heard laughter, chatter, the squeak of sneakers. But now, those sounds didn't scare her. She knew not every battle was won, but every word spoken Every step forward brought her closer to a world where she could be herself, without fear, without shame. And as she stepped into the school courtyard, where the snow had melted and the first buds were breaking through on the trees, Nora felt a light breeze on her face. She took a deep breath and smiled. The future held unknowns, but she was ready, because she was Nora Williams, and that was enough.